It always has been one of the remarkable features that international competition for so long has been equal between men and women. It took a little bit longer with eventing, but not that much. And I think it says a lot for the sport in general, and a lot for horses in particular, that is entirely acceptable, and it works.
You won't believe what Princess Anne caught Queen Camilla doing behind King Charles's back. This shocking secret was hidden for years until one fateful night at Windsor Castle changed everything. What Anne discovered will make your jaw drop and has the entire royal family in crisis mode. Princess Anne has long been recognized as one of the most dedicated members of the British royal family, earning her reputation through decades of unwavering commitment to royal duties and charitable work.
I've always wanted to attend this festival since it was founded in 2017, so I'm more than delighted to be able to get here today. The unique mix of lively but respectful conversation, magical location, and inspirational speeches.
Her straightforward manner and no-nonsense approach have made her both respected and, at times, feared within palace circles. Those who know her well understand that Anne possesses an unusually sharp eye for detail and an almost uncanny ability to see through pretense and political maneuvering. It was this very characteristic that would prove crucial during what many now consider one of the most significant internal crises the modern monarchy has faced. The events began to unfold during the annual charity gala at Windsor Castle, an occasion that traditionally brings together the royal family, government officials, and prominent figures from British society. These gatherings, while appearing to be simple social events, often serve as venues where important conversations take place away from the public eye. On this particular evening, the castle was filled with the usual atmosphere of refined elegance. Hundreds of guests moved through the grand halls, their conversations mixing with the soft music provided by the palace orchestra. The event was proceeding as expected, with various members of the royal family fulfilling their hosting duties and engaging with the assembled dignitaries. However, beneath the surface of polite conversation and ceremonial protocol, something far more serious was taking place. Princess Anne, as was her custom at such events, positioned herself where she could observe the proceedings without becoming the center of attention. Her years of experience had taught her that the most revealing moments often occurred when people believed they were unobserved. From her vantage point near one of the castle's historic portrait galleries, she could see much of the main reception area while remaining relatively inconspicuous herself. It was during this routine observation that Anne noticed Queen Camilla withdrawing from the main group of guests, accompanied by a man she recognized as Lord Taverner, a financier known for his involvement in various international investment schemes. While it was not unusual for royals to have private conversations during public events, something about their manner suggested this was not a casual social interaction. The pair had moved to a secluded area near the balcony overlooking the castle's gardens, a location that offered them privacy while still being technically within the event space. Anne's instincts, sharpened by decades of palace life, told her that this warranted closer attention. She carefully repositioned herself behind an ornate decorative screen that allowed her to remain hidden while still being able to hear their conversation. What Anne overheard during those few minutes would fundamentally change her understanding of the situation within the royal household. The conversation between Camilla and Lord Taverner was conducted in hushed tones, but the acoustics of the location carried their words clearly to Anne's position. The discussion centered around financial arrangements that appeared to involve the movement of significant funds through various investment vehicles. Camilla spoke with an urgency that seemed out of character for her usual composed public demeanor. She emphasized the need for swift action regarding what she referred to as royal private funds, using language that suggested a level of personal involvement that went beyond her official duties. Lord Taverner's responses indicated his willingness to facilitate these arrangements through his network of international business connections. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but its content was sufficient to alarm Anne deeply. The discussion appeared to outline a plan for moving money through legitimate-seeming investment channels, including luxury goods and charitable foundations. in a way that would obscure the original source and ultimate destination of the funds. This type of financial maneuvering, while potentially legal on the surface, raised serious questions about the proper use of royal resources and the potential for personal enrichment at the expense of public trust. Anne found herself facing a dilemma that would test both her loyalty to her family and her commitment to the integrity of the monarchy. The implications of what she had heard were staggering, particularly given Camilla's position as queen consort and the trust that had been placed in her by both Charles and the British public. The conversation suggested a level of financial manipulation that could seriously damage the royal family's reputation if it became public knowledge. Unable to continue with the pretense of enjoying the gala, Anne made her way to King Charles's private study, a location where they could speak without interruption or observation. Charles was alone when she arrived, reviewing some documents by lamplight, apparently taking a brief respite from his hosting duties. Anne's demeanor immediately signaled to her brother that this was not a casual visit. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult either sibling had ever experienced. Anne, known for her direct communication style, wasted no time in explaining what she had witnessed. She recounted the overheard conversation in precise detail, emphasizing the specific language used and the apparent urgency of the planned financial transactions. Her presentation was factual and measured, avoiding emotional language while making clear the serious nature of her concerns. Charles's initial reaction was one of disbelief and defensive loyalty to his wife. This response was entirely understandable given the strength of his personal relationship with Camilla and the trust he had placed in her since their marriage. He questioned whether Anne might have misunderstood the context of the conversation or misinterpreted innocent business discussions as something more sinister. However, Anne's reputation for accuracy and her obvious reluctance to bring such serious accusations against Camilla gradually convinced Charles that her concerns warranted serious consideration. The weight of her words was enhanced by her obvious distress at having to report such information about a family member. Anne made it clear that she took no pleasure in bringing these concerns to Charles's attention, but felt compelled to do so by her duty to protect the monarchy's integrity. The immediate aftermath of this conversation created a profound shift in the dynamics within the royal household. Charles found himself caught between his personal loyalty to his wife and his responsibilities as monarch. The seed of doubt that Anne had planted began to grow, as Charles reflected on recent events and behaviors that had previously seemed insignificant, but now took on new meaning in light of Anne's revelations. This marked the beginning of what would become an increasingly complex and painful investigation into activities that threatened to undermine the very foundations of public trust in the royal family. The quiet conversation in Charles's study represented a turning point that would ultimately lead to consequences none of them could have fully anticipated at the time. In the days following Anne's revelation, the atmosphere within the royal household underwent a subtle but unmistakable transformation. While the public continued to see the familiar facade of royal duties and ceremonial functions, those within the palace walls could sense an underlying tension that had not existed before. Queen Camilla, however, appeared remarkably unaffected by any concerns about her conversation having been overheard. Her composure during this period was notable for its complete lack of anxiety or defensive behavior. This calm demeanor was not the result of ignorance about her situation. Camilla had noticed Princess Anne's presence in the portrait gallery during the gala, and her years of experience in navigating complex social and political situations had taught her to be aware of her surroundings. She understood that her conversation with Lord Taverner might have been compromised, but rather than panic, she chose to accelerate her plans while maintaining the appearance of complete normalcy. The morning after the gala, Camilla arranged a private meeting with Sir Julian Whitmore, the long-serving financial overseer whose family had managed royal accounts for 3 generations. Sir Julian was a man whose loyalty to the crown was absolute, shaped by decades of service and a deep respect for royal tradition. His advanced age and conservative nature made him an ideal candidate for Camilla's purposes, as his unquestioning deference to royal authority would prevent him from scrutinizing her instructions too closely. During their meeting in Camilla's private office, she presented her financial requests as necessary measures to protect the monarchy's assets during a period of global economic uncertainty. She spoke persuasively about the need to diversify royal investments and move certain funds into more secure international arrangements. Her approach was masterful in its appeal to Sir Julian's sense of duty and his desire to be seen as a trusted guardian of royal interests. The Royal Preservation Trust, a legitimate charitable foundation established to support cultural and environmental projects, became the primary vehicle for these transactions. On paper, the foundation's activities appeared entirely appropriate, funding art acquisitions, historical preservation projects, and environmental initiatives that aligned with well-established royal priorities. However, beneath this legitimate facade, a more complex financial structure was being constructed. Camilla's instructions to Sir Julian involved creating what appeared to be routine investment decisions, but were actually carefully orchestrated transfers designed to move substantial sums through multiple intermediaries. These transactions included purchases of artwork at significantly inflated prices from galleries controlled by associates of Lord Taverner, investments in environmental projects that existed primarily on paper, and charitable donations to newly established foundations that lacked meaningful oversight mechanisms. Each transaction was accompanied by proper documentation and followed established procedures for royal financial management. The complexity of these arrangements ensured that casual observation would reveal nothing suspicious, while the legitimate charitable purposes provided cover for any questions that might arise. Sir Julian, trusting in Camilla's explanation and lacking the expertise to recognize the sophisticated nature of the scheme, executed each instruction with his characteristic attention to detail. Meanwhile, Princess Anne had begun her own careful investigation into the concerns she had raised with Charles. Understanding that direct accusations without substantial evidence would be ineffective and potentially damaging to the monarchy, she chose to pursue a more methodical approach. Her first step was to identify someone within the royal administration who possessed both the technical expertise to understand complex financial transactions and the integrity to assist in uncovering potential wrongdoing. Eleanor Vance represented the ideal candidate for this delicate task. As a senior treasury accountant with over 15 years of experience managing royal finances, she had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of normal financial flows and an instinctive ability to identify irregularities. Her reputation for incorruptibility was well established, and her position provided her with access to the detailed records that would be necessary for any meaningful investigation. Anne's approach to Eleanor was carefully calculated to avoid raising suspicions while still conveying the seriousness of her concerns. During a seemingly casual encounter in one of the palace's less frequented gardens, Anne mentioned her interest in ensuring that recent charitable investments were being managed with appropriate oversight. She framed her request as a routine quality assurance measure, rather than an investigation into potential misconduct. Eleanor's professional instincts immediately recognized that Anne's request went beyond routine oversight. The specific nature of the questions and the unusual circumstances of their meeting suggested that more serious concerns were involved. However, her respect for Princess Anne's judgment and her own commitment to maintaining the integrity of royal financial management led her to agree to conduct a discreet review of recent transactions. As Eleanor began her examination of the Royal Preservation Trust's recent activities, several irregularities became apparent. The pattern of transactions showed an unusual concentration of large transfers, occurring within a relatively short time frame, followed by complex routing through multiple intermediary accounts. While each individual transaction appeared legitimate when viewed in isolation, the overall pattern suggested a level of coordination that went beyond normal investment management. The financial documentation was impeccable, meeting all formal requirements and bearing the appropriate authorizations. However, Eleanor's experienced eye detected subtle inconsistencies in the timing and nature of these transactions that raised questions about their ultimate purpose. The inflated valuations of certain art purchases, the lack of detailed project plans for some environmental investments, and the rapid establishment of several new charitable foundations all contributed to a picture that demanded closer scrutiny. During this same period, Camilla was not inactive in protecting her interests. Her years of experience in public life had taught her to be sensitive to shifts in the political and social dynamics around her, and she had begun to notice subtle changes in the behavior of both Charles and Anne. Charles's manner toward her had become more formal and distant, lacking the warmth that had characterized their relationship. Anne's sudden interest in engaging more frequently in social activities together represented a significant departure from her usual preference for maintaining professional rather than personal relationships with other family members. These observations led Camilla to implement her own protective measures. She began varying her daily routines, changing the locations and timing of sensitive conversations, and limiting the number of people who had access to information about her financial arrangements. She also started paying closer attention to the activities of palace staff, particularly those who might have access to financial records or communication systems. The result was an increasingly complex game of observation and counter-observation, with each side attempting to gather information while preventing the other from doing the same. Palace staff began to notice the unusual tension between family members, though they were unable to understand its source. The normal rhythm of royal life continued, but underneath the surface, a careful battle of intelligence gathering was taking place. This period of investigation and counter-investigation created an atmosphere of suspicion that affected everyone within the royal household. Conversations became more guarded, and routine interactions carried an undercurrent of wariness that had not existed before. The palace, traditionally a place where discretion and loyalty ensured smooth operations, had become a place where trust was carefully rationed, and every action was subject to scrutiny. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would ultimately determine not only the fate of those directly involved, but also the future integrity of the institution they all served. The evidence gathered by Eleanor Vance had reached a point where King Charles could no longer dismiss his growing concerns as mere suspicion or family tension. The financial irregularities she had identified, while individually explainable, formed a pattern that demanded professional investigation beyond the capabilities of internal palace resources. Charles found himself facing one of the most difficult decisions of his reign, knowing that the next steps he took would have profound consequences for both his family and the monarchy itself. The decision to hire an independent audit team represented a significant escalation in the investigation. Charles understood that bringing outsiders into such a sensitive matter carried enormous risks, but the alternative of allowing potential financial misconduct to continue unchecked posed an even greater threat to the institution he had sworn to protect. The audit team he selected consisted of forensic accountants and financial investigators who specialized in complex international transactions and had experience working with high-profile clients who required absolute discretion. All communications with the external auditors were conducted through encrypted channels and arranged during late evening hours when palace activity was minimal. Charles entrusted only Princess Anne with knowledge of these arrangements, recognizing that her role in uncovering the initial concerns made her the logical choice for serving as a liaison. The investigation's scope was carefully defined to focus on specific transactions, while avoiding any appearance of a general fishing expedition that might compromise the privacy of legitimate royal financial activities. While the professional investigators began their detailed analysis of financial records and international money transfers, Anne undertook the more personally challenging task of gathering intelligence from within the royal household itself. This required her to fundamentally alter her normal behavior patterns and engage with Camilla in ways that went against her natural preferences and established relationship dynamics. Anne's transformation from distant sister-in-law to engaged family member required considerable acting ability. She began accepting invitations to social events she would normally decline, engaging in conversations about topics that held little interest for her, and displaying enthusiasm for activities she had previously avoided. This included accompanying Camilla to art gallery exhibitions, participating in discussions about interior decoration projects, and showing interest in the details of charitable foundation management. During these interactions, Anne listened carefully for any information that might provide insight into Camilla's financial activities or reveal connections to external associates like Lord Taverner. She paid particular attention to casual mentions of new business relationships, travel plans that might involve meetings with financial advisors, and any expressions of concern about regulatory oversight or public scrutiny of royal finances. The difficulty of maintaining this deceptive role weighed heavily on Anne, whose straightforward nature made sustained pretense particularly challenging. However, her commitment to protecting the monarchy's integrity provided the motivation necessary to continue the performance, despite her personal discomfort. She documented each conversation and observation, building a detailed picture of Camilla's activities and associations that could potentially support the financial investigation. Camilla, meanwhile, had not remained passive in response to the changing dynamics within the palace. Her own intelligence-gathering efforts had begun to yield concerning information about unusual activities within the royal administration. She had noticed an increase in after-hours meetings involving Charles's closest advisors, changes in the normal patterns of document circulation, and the presence of unfamiliar individuals who appeared to have privileged access to normally restricted areas of the palace. Her investigation into these anomalies led to the identification of external auditors who had been granted access to royal financial records. This discovery confirmed her suspicions that Charles and Anne were actively investigating her activities, and that their apparent reconciliation with her was actually part of a coordinated effort to gather evidence against her. The realization that she was the target of a formal investigation triggered a more aggressive response strategy. Understanding that her best defense lay in shaping public perception and internal palace opinion, Camilla began implementing a sophisticated public relations campaign designed to strengthen her position while undermining potential critics. She increased her public appearances at charitable events, ensuring maximum media coverage of her humanitarian activities and community engagement. These appearances were carefully choreographed to emphasize her dedication to public service and her positive relationship with Charles. Simultaneously, Camilla began cultivating relationships with key palace staff members and external supporters who could serve as allies in any future conflict. She used her position to grant favors, make strategic appointments, and build a network of individuals who would have reasons to support her if accusations emerged. This network included media contacts who could be relied upon to present favorable coverage and political figures who benefited from royal association. More significantly, Camilla began spreading carefully crafted suggestions about Princess Anne's motivations and mental state. These suggestions, while never rising to the level of direct accusations, implied that Anne harbored jealousy about Camilla's prominent role and influence within the royal family. The narrative being constructed suggested that Anne's historical reputation for bluntness and occasional social difficulties made her prone to creating unnecessary conflicts and seeing conspiracies where none existed. This campaign of subtle character assassination was particularly effective because it built upon existing perceptions of Anne's personality and relationship dynamics within the royal family. Palace staff and external observers, who were unaware of the underlying investigation, began interpreting Anne's changed behavior toward Camilla as evidence of her attempts to create problems rather than solve them. The apparent warmth between the two women was seen as artificial and manipulative, rather than as evidence of Anne's efforts to gather information. The pressure created by this dual-front battle began taking its toll on all involved parties. Anne found herself increasingly isolated, as rumors about her motivations spread throughout the palace community. Charles, caught between his institutional responsibilities and personal loyalties, struggled to maintain the appearance of normal family relationships while managing the stress of the ongoing investigation. The weight of keeping such significant secrets while continuing his public duties created visible strain that palace observers attributed to the general pressures of his role rather than to specific family conflicts. The investigation itself was yielding increasingly damaging evidence. The external auditors had traced the complex network of transactions through multiple international accounts and identified clear patterns of money laundering, disguised as legitimate charitable and investment activities. The sophistication of the scheme impressed even experienced forensic accountants, who recognized the level of planning and coordination required to create such an elaborate financial structure. However, the investigators understood that financial evidence alone, while compelling, might not be sufficient to prove criminal intent or secure convictions in legal proceedings. What they needed was direct evidence of Camilla's knowledge and participation in the scheme, preferably in the form of recorded conversations or documentary evidence that clearly demonstrated her awareness of the fraudulent nature of the transactions. This need for more direct evidence created additional pressure on Anne's intelligence-gathering efforts and raised questions about whether the investigation would ultimately be able to proceed beyond the documentation of suspicious financial patterns. The stakes continued to rise as each side maneuvered for advantage in what had become a high-stakes game with the future of the monarchy hanging in the balance. The situation reached a critical juncture when one of the external auditors, Malcolm Richardson, made a discovery that would fundamentally change the nature of the entire investigation and provide the breakthrough that Charles and Anne had been seeking. Malcolm Richardson's discovery came at a moment when the investigation seemed to be reaching the limits of what financial analysis alone could accomplish. As a senior forensic accountant with extensive experience in international fraud cases, Malcolm had been methodically tracing the complex web of transactions that formed the foundation of the money laundering scheme. His work had already established clear patterns of suspicious financial activity, but proving deliberate criminal intent remained challenging without direct evidence of the participants' knowledge and motivations. The breakthrough occurred during what Malcolm initially assumed would be a routine examination of recorded business communications. As part of his standard investigative procedures, he had requested access to all recorded conversations involving key figures in the financial transactions. Most of these recordings were mundane discussions of investment strategies and charitable project management that provided little insight into criminal activity. However, one particular recording stood out for its unusual timing and the nervous behavior of the participants. The recording captured a private conversation between Camilla and Sir Julian Whitmore that had taken place in Camilla's office several weeks after the initial gala incident. The conversation had been automatically recorded by the palace's standard security systems, which routinely documented meetings involving financial discussions for legal protection purposes. Neither participant had been aware that their conversation was being preserved, leading them to speak with unusual frankness about their activities. In the recording, Camilla's voice was clearly identifiable as she discussed the need to accelerate certain financial transfers before increased scrutiny could interfere with their plans. She spoke explicitly about using the Royal Preservation Trust as a cover for moving money into private accounts, and her language left no doubt about her awareness that these activities were inappropriate and potentially illegal. Most damaging of all, she made several disparaging comments about the British public's trust in the royal family, describing their faith as naive and easily exploited. Malcolm recognized immediately that this recording represented the type of direct evidence that could transform the investigation from a matter of suspicious financial patterns into a clear case of deliberate fraud and betrayal of public trust. However, he also understood the enormous sensitivity of the material and the potential consequences of its disclosure. The decision of what to do with this evidence would require careful consideration of both legal and constitutional implications. The weight of this knowledge proved too much for Malcolm to bear alone. Despite his professional obligations to maintain client confidentiality, his conscience compelled him to take action that went beyond his contracted responsibilities. After several sleepless nights wrestling with the ethical implications of his situation, he made the decision to contact Princess Anne directly and provide her with access to the recording. The meeting between Malcolm and Anne took place in a secluded location away from the palace, chosen to ensure complete privacy and prevent any possibility of their interaction being observed or recorded. Malcolm's appearance clearly showed the stress he had been experiencing since making his discovery. His hands trembled as he explained the contents of the recording and provided Anne with a secure digital copy of the evidence. Anne received the recording with a mixture of vindication and profound sadness. While the evidence confirmed her worst suspicions about Camilla's activities, it also represented the final destruction of any hope that the situation might be resolved without devastating consequences for her family. She understood that the recording would provide Charles with undeniable proof of his wife's betrayal, but she also knew that this revelation would cause him enormous personal pain. The decision to present the evidence to Charles was not one that Anne approached lightly. She recognized that once Charles heard the recording, there would be no possibility of reconciliation or forgiveness, and their family relationships would be permanently altered. However, her duty to protect the monarchy's integrity outweighed her personal concerns about the emotional impact on her brother. Anne arranged to meet with Charles in his private library during an evening when they could be certain of privacy and sufficient time for a full discussion of the implications. The library's quiet atmosphere and familiar surroundings provided an appropriate setting for what both siblings understood would be one of the most significant conversations of their lives. Anne's demeanor as she entered the room immediately signaled to Charles that she brought news of critical importance. Without lengthy preamble, Anne explained Malcolm's discovery and the contents of the recorded conversation. She then played the recording for Charles, allowing him to hear Camilla's words in her own voice without any interpretation or commentary. The impact of the recording on Charles was immediate and devastating. His face remained impassive throughout the playback, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable as he heard his wife discuss their marriage and his trust as tools to be exploited for financial gain. The recording's most damaging elements went beyond the simple admission of financial fraud. Camilla's casual dismissal of public trust and her apparent amusement at the ease with which she had manipulated both royal resources and family relationships revealed a level of cynicism and disregard that Charles found difficult to reconcile with the woman he thought he had married. The revelation that she viewed his love and loyalty as weaknesses to be exploited rather than genuine emotions to be treasured struck at the core of his identity as both a husband and a king. Charles's reaction to the evidence was characterized by a profound silence that spoke more eloquently than any emotional outburst could have done. He sat motionless for several minutes after the recording ended, processing the full implications of what he had heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but hollow, reflecting the internal struggle between his personal devastation and his institutional responsibilities. The conversation between Charles and Anne that followed the revelation established the framework for how they would proceed. Both understood that the evidence required formal action, not only to address the immediate criminal behavior, but also to preserve public confidence in the monarchy's integrity. They discussed the legal requirements for reporting financial crimes, the constitutional implications of prosecuting a member of the royal family, and the practical considerations of managing public disclosure of such sensitive information. Charles made the decision to convene a formal meeting with his senior advisors to present the evidence and determine the appropriate legal and administrative responses. This meeting would include only those individuals whose positions required them to be informed and whose discretion could be absolutely trusted. The group would consist of the king's private secretary, the royal household's legal counsel, and 2 senior advisors who had served the monarchy for decades. The formal presentation of evidence took place in the palace's main conference room, a location chosen for its official character and the gravity it would lend to the proceedings. Charles opened the meeting by explaining the background of the investigation and the serious nature of the evidence that had been uncovered. His presentation was methodical and dispassionate, focusing on the legal and institutional implications, rather than the personal betrayal he had experienced. When the recording was played for the assembled advisors, their reactions mirrored Charles's own shock and disappointment. These were individuals who had dedicated their careers to serving the monarchy and protecting its reputation, and they immediately understood the magnitude of the crisis they were facing. The evidence was so clear and damaging that there could be no question about the necessity of taking formal action, regardless of the personal cost to the royal family. The meeting concluded with Charles's announcement of his decision to revoke all of Camilla's royal titles and privileges, effective immediately. This decision represented not only a response to her criminal behavior, but also a statement about the monarchy's commitment to maintaining ethical standards, even when doing so required significant personal sacrifice. The advisors were tasked with implementing this decision while managing the complex legal and public relations challenges that would inevitably follow. Camilla's removal from her position as queen consort was executed with the same attention to protocol and procedure that characterized all royal administrative actions. She was formally notified of the decision and given a brief period to arrange her departure from the palace. Her access to royal resources and facilities was terminated, and arrangements were made for her to relocate to a private residence away from London. The aftermath of these events left lasting changes in all the lives involved. Charles retained his throne and the respect of his advisors and the public, but the personal cost of his decision created a permanent sense of loss and betrayal that affected his approach to both his official duties and his private relationships. The experience taught him painful lessons about the intersection of personal trust and public responsibility that would influence his reign for years to come. Princess Anne's role in uncovering and addressing the crisis enhanced her reputation as a guardian of royal integrity, but it also reinforced her preference for maintaining emotional distance in her family relationships. The experience confirmed her belief that institutional loyalty must take precedence over personal considerations, even when the cost is enormous. For Camilla, the consequences extended far beyond the loss of titles and privileges. Her exile from royal life represented the complete destruction of the identity and status she had worked decades to achieve. The transition from queen consort to private citizen living in isolation provided her with ample time to reflect on the choices that had led to her downfall and the ultimate futility of pursuing personal gain at the expense of institutional trust. The resolution of this crisis demonstrated that even within the unique context of the British monarchy, principles of accountability and justice could prevail over personal relationships and political considerations. However, it also illustrated the enormous personal cost that maintaining institutional integrity sometimes requires from those who serve in positions of public trust.